What, you know what, just to be safe thing you did, end up saving your ass later. Story 1. Was delivering pizza in a sketchy block of town late at night. Huge apartment complex with multiple buildings. Walking up to the front door, I noticed a couple of guys wearing dark clothing about 100 feet behind me, walking in my direction. Delivery was on the second floor, and by the time I reached her door, I heard the main door of the apartment complex open and close. She used a CC for the order and tipped in cash, so when I was putting the receipt into my bag, where I kept my cash, I actually pulled the rest of the cash out and stuffed it into my inner jacket pocket, just to be safe, leaving just the change I had that night in the bag. Started to head down the stairs back to my car, and two guys jumped out from behind the stairs, and one had a gun pointed at me and told me to give them the money. I quickly handed them my bag filled with quarters, and they took off towards the back entrance of the apartment complex. I never ran so fast in my life back to my car. I wanted to make sure I was as far away as possible before they realized they robbed me of $3.50 in quarters. Story 2. I dropped my high school girlfriend off, then for some reason I locked the passenger door. Not 10 minutes later, I was stopped at a red light, and some scummy-looking dude tried to open up the door. I have no idea why I locked the door after she got out. I really didn't have a habit of that. No idea what would have happened if that guy got in my truck. Something similar happened to me. I was dropping my friend off at home. He lived in a sketchy neighborhood. I had my driver's side door locked, and as soon as he got out, I immediately locked the other one. These three girls come running out of the bushes trying to open my car doors. One jumped on my hood and I fucking gunned it. She rolled off my car. The other chucked her drink at my driver's side door. I'm terrified to think about what they were going to do to me. Story 3. My dad lost his glasses once. He was going to just use his old prescription, but at the last minute decided to just go to the optometrist anyway in case something changed. Turned out he had a tear in his retina and was booked for surgery within 24 hours. It was bad enough, they said, he probably would have gone blind really soon had they not caught it when they did. Story 4. Learned CPR and first aid. Had to give CPR to a family friend when she collapsed from a heart attack, and thankfully, she was brought back after being down for 15 minutes. She only had minor memory problems, and mostly just couldn't remember that day. She is still here and kicking years later. Story 5. My stomach had some issues, and my doctor sent me for a colonoscopy just to get things checked out. They found one polyp, no big deal, not related to the current problem, and told me to come back in 5 years just in case. I put a Google reminder and forgot about it. 5 years later, I went for the colonoscopy, and they found a lot more, and said I would have ended up with cancer in 5 to 20 years for sure had I not gone. Instead, they removed all polyps, and now I'm regularly going to colonoscopies due to having a syndrome they identified. I'm far away from the age where you normally get a colonoscopy, so I would definitely have got cancer. When you are eligible, or if it is recommended, get a colonoscopy. Story 6. Not my ass, but I was getting ready for school whilst Mom was vomiting in the bathroom. She said it was just a stomach bug and to just go to school, but mentioned her arm hurt. Something didn't sit right, so I called the ambulance from downstairs. They arrived and took her into the ambulance. She then proceeded to have 3 cardiac arrests and needed to be defibrillated each time. A double bypass later, and she was up and about within a month. Paramedics told me she would have died 5 minutes after I left if I hadn't called. Story 7. Snow chains at the bottom of the mountain. A bunch of cars passed me on a clear road on the way up with several warnings all the way up. I saw a local throwing on chains with no snow in the area. I decided to be safe and put them on. 30 minutes later, I was in one of the worst snow driving conditions I've ever seen. Whiteout conditions in a snowstorm that eventually resulted in the complete shutdown of the roads. I passed car crash after car crash with just enough traction to feel somewhat comfortable moving 15 miles an hour. Anyone heading to Tahoe needs chains, and chains that fit. Don't fuck around. I don't care if you have a 4-wheel drive. Driving through Tahoe and Mammoth during snowstorms is no joke. Literally sunny with no clouds to blinding white darkness in an hour. If you find yourself near Heavenly and Siri sends you a snowed-over hill that feels too steep, turn around. Unless you have the right setup, you aren't going to make it. Snow chains or not, you will slide. Just take the Harrah's gondola if it's that bad. If you don't already have your own gear, try another resort. Heavenly is uniquely bad for rentals and beginners in general. Story 8. I had a female patient coming for I-131 therapy. Patient must not be pregnant, and to make sure, we do a blood test 1 day prior to dosing. I checked the results on the screen that were negative. I printed it out and put it in the patient file just in case, although we went paperless years earlier. After giving her radiation safety instructions and discharging her, she came a couple of days saying that she was late. The doctor inserted another pregnancy blood test and it came out positive. The lab technician went to the previous negative blood test and changed it to positive. Hadn't I printed the test, it would look like I dosed the patient while pregnant and could get fired. Staff before this incident used to make fun of me for being paranoid. After this incident, everyone started printing the results. Story 9. Normally I'm pretty impressionable and cave to peer pressure. But this one time, when I was younger, I was hanging with my friends and a couple of older high school guys I'd only met that day. The girls were all fawning over them, but I could tell they were idiots. When they all wanted to go for a drive with the guys, I thought, nah, I don't trust these guys, and I think it's best I just call my parents and go home. I got a call the next morning from one of the girls who was a passenger. One of the high school boys was driving. They had a serious crash and one of the girls wasn't wearing her seatbelt and hit her head on the dash and was in a coma for 6 months. She was in intensive care and rehabilitation for years. Still can't believe all the days I decided to not go with the flow. It probably saved my life. Terribly sad about my friend. We were really close, but she never came right and her personality changed. I still wonder how successful she might have been and if we'd still be friends if that hadn't happened to her. Really sad. Story 10. Similar story here. 3 older kids were going out drinking one night and my girlfriend invited me to go with them. I decided to stay home that night. They went drinking and driving. They crashed around midnight in the middle of winter. My girlfriend was lying in the snow for 8+ hours until she was found by a bus driver. She was paralyzed from the waist down. The 2 guys were killed in the crash. Very graphic scene. Very awful deaths. Never, ever drink and drive. Story 11. Was watching my toddler nephew and he'd found a metal straw somewhere in the house and started playing with it. He was just tapping stuff and waving it around. But I just read a story on Reddit about a woman who got completely fucked up by a metal straw when she fell and it impaled her face. So I took the metal one from the nephew and gave him a soft, squishy silicone one to play with instead. I'm not exaggerating when I say less than 5 minutes later, he fell, like toddlers do, and I saw the silicone straw all squished into his cheek. I had to just sit for a while after that, lol. Story 12. On a road trip with my siblings and I. Dad, in Latin America, he lived there and we were visiting. On a highway at night with clouds, no moon, and no lights. This was a new highway that nobody likes taking now, as criminals often leave glass or spikes to puncture tires and rob you, or worse. We were driving, and this guy was pulled over and waving for help. My dad stopped behind, and the guy was scared and asked if we could light up his car while he changed a flat tire. He was terrified of being out where alone, and rightfully so. Dad goes to get out to help, and my sister grabbed him and said she didn't think this felt right. Dad assured us it was fine and almost got out, but my sister grabbed him again. Right then, a car flew by the door right where he would have been. 4 guys jump out, one grabs the man, puts a gun to his head, and the others sprint to our car. There was a brief chase down the highway, but luckily their old Corolla didn't keep up with our Jeep, and they gave up after 2 to 3 minutes of driving at 170 kilometers per hour. My sister saved my dad's life, and probably ours, by making him stay in the car that extra few seconds. Story 13. One day I was attempting to make karaoke for the first time, a kind of Filipino fried mochi, and after I popped them in the oil, I settled in and watched them carefully. I never wear an apron whilst cooking, but for some reason, I figured why not this time, and as soon as I stepped out of range of the fryer, they all exploded. Turns out, karaoke can form an impermeable shell when fried, so pressure built up inside until they popped, and sprayed hot oil all over the kitchen. Of course, I was safely away reaching for an apron, and was completely dumbfounded. Make sure to punch some holes in all subsequent batches. Of course, once I cleaned the kitchen, I ate them, and they were delicious. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. Story 14. Grabbed a helmet when riding a bike down a steep hill as a kid. Normally, I didn't bite. I ended up falling at top speed and breaking my helmet and chipping 3 teeth. Could have been my head that was broken. Story 15. Lived in Baltimore at the time. Pulled up outside my place after getting off a late shift and had to get a backpack out of my trunk before going in. I noticed a group of teenage kids hanging out on the corner and thought, nope. Called my roommate to come watch me walk to the door. About 10 minutes later, a girl comes running down the street bleeding, saying she got jumped by the group of kids for no reason. Stay alert out there, y'all. Story 16. Leaving a spare set of keys at the pub that I live above. Went out on St. Patrick's Day and had my coat stolen. I keep my keys in my coat. At 3 in the morning, I had genuinely no idea how I would have been able to get home otherwise. Definitely not some big life-saving moment or anything, but it was a relief, lol. Story 17. Not me, but a coworker. Was trying to separate some railroad ties with a crowbar as part of his yard work for the day when it popped, a nail flew and embedded itself in one of the lenses of his safety glasses he threw on because he had them for work. He keeps them on his desk as a reminder. PPE is not just for the workplace, folks. Story 18. Had my boat trailer bearings repacked by the boat repair shop / dealer before I went on a trip that I had to tow it for 400 plus miles. I usually repack the bearings myself, but figured I'd have the pros do it since I had a long haul ahead of me. The day before I left, I decided to double check that the bearing case was full of grease. Without it, they would overheat and I'd be fucked royally and stranded with a high risk of a wheel actually coming off the trailer if I didn't notice it in transit. There was no grease at all in the bearing case on any of the 4 wheels. I would have been lucky to make it 20 miles before something serious happened. Also, this has been a habit for decades. Pat my pocket to make sure my keys are in my pocket before closing the locked house door, my car door, etc. Story 19. Not my ass, but my mom. She and I were home alone and I was getting ready to go to a party. I came upstairs and found her with the carbon monoxide detector in pieces on the coffee table. She said it was beeping, and apparently once years ago in our last house, one was malfunctioning and giving a false alarm, so I guess she just assumed it was happening again. I shrugged it off and continued getting ready. I was about to leave, but something was nagging at me. She was insisting it was fine. After some arguing with her, I said, no, we are calling the fire department. So I did. They came, and the levels of carbon monoxide were so high in the basement, they said anyone sleeping down there would be dead already. Our cats were vomiting from the poisoning, and we didn't realize. I guess the filter on the furnace was so clogged it was pumping out carbon monoxide. One of the firefighters pulled me aside and said if I hadn't called, I likely would have come home to my mom dead in her bed. Story 20. Was on a side-by-side vehicle mudding on some property a friend and I were visiting. Mid-ride, I turn to my friend and say, hey, you should probably buckle your seatbelt, just in case. Not 1 minute later did he lose control and slide front first into a tree going about as fast as this thing could go, given the conditions. Both of us were okay, but the side-by-side was completely ruined. He looked at me right after, and his eyes were as big as dinner plates. Story 21. Saved the GPS location of my vehicle on Google Maps before exploring a national forest with a road trip buddy. We grabbed some fishing poles and headed out towards the nearest water location on our map to hopefully catch a couple fish. Turns out it was a swamp, not a lake, and we got so incredibly turned around, it could have ended very badly. We really didn't go that far in from where we parked, but somehow ended up being on the other side of the swamp without realizing it. Drizzling rain, mosquitoes, bear tracks, and the sun started going down before we found the car. Without the GPS coordinates saved, it would have been a cold, wet night in the woods at a minimum, and more than likely a search and rescue required situation. Story 22. Worked alone in a gambling / video poker place. Closing. Strange guy came in and started making small talk with me. I was expected to be kind and friendly to everybody who came in, so I was doing that. I decided to send a message to my boyfriend and a friend, and then something in me told me to take a picture of the guy as he moved closer to the counter I was behind. I snuck one real quick and sent it to said friend since she was awake. She called me immediately as she drove the 20 minutes to my job. An hour before I got off, I'll add. I didn't drive, so I had no vehicle in the now abandoned parking lot, the only car being his, which was conveniently backed in right next to the front door. 2 days later, there was a missing persons report released of someone who was a very familiar build and features that I have, and suspected trafficking in the area. She went missing later that same night. He left after my friend showed up. I've never had such an uneasy feeling in my life, and I truly think sending those messages are what saved my life. He was waiting for me to get off work at 1 a.m. Our hours were right on the front door. Story 23. Might sound ridiculous, but many years ago when I did my mandatory community service, a thing in Germany as a counterpart to mandatory military service, there was a particular day in a pretty harsh winter. I usually went to work with my bike, as the streets were cleared of snow and ice anyway. On this day, I didn't take my helmet off because when I arrived at the place I worked, I immediately started to shovel snow and didn't even walk inside first. My workplace was a huge and old 4-story hostel in the woods. The roof was packed with snow, and there were massive icicles hanging from the gutters. When a coworker asked me why I decided to look like an idiot with my helmet on, I jokingly replied it was for serious security reasons. A few moments later, an icicle block fell down and hit me on the head and the shoulders. The impact was so brutal that it made me fall down on my knees. Shoulders were bruised, but my head was fine. I really don't know what could have happened if I didn't wear my stupid bicycle helmet for fun that morning. Serious injury for sure. Story 24. I once subcultured a master culture which was used in a very important research study. We were specifically told not to do that because of patent liabilities. But still, I had a gut feeling that we were going to need another plate cultured. And lo and behold, a student accidentally dropped the plate in a lab and it shattered, saved us 6 months of time and penalties. Story 25. During a hurricane, I realized the street was flooding, so I figured I should move my car farther up the driveway. On my way out, I had the sudden urge to poop, so, just to be safe, I stopped by the bathroom first. Maybe 30 seconds later, boom! The neighbor's tree fell directly on my car, crushing it. Story 26. Was in a dune buggy with a roll cage and just driving it around the neighborhood. Put on a motocross helmet just to be safe. When we wrecked, the side of the helmet that hit the road was completely white, as all the paint had been scraped off. Story 27. There are times when it's crucial for me to take something with me when I leave home the next day. I figure that of course I'll remember because it's so crucial, but just to be safe, I will put the thing on top of my car keys. And yes, that's bailed me out a couple of times. Story 28. My friend and his wife were having their first child. They had gotten a big packet of information and paperwork to fill out before the due date to make things easier. There were also brochures for genetic testing and other things that could be done, and one of the things was about saving the cord blood. My friend said that he looked at the front of the brochure and his wife asked if they should do it. It is not cheap. A couple $1,000s to save it, and a few hundred a year after that. My friend said yes. Their daughter was born later that year. 3 years after her birth, they had a boy, and he was born with an immune disorder, no white cells, and his big sister's cord blood and stem cells were used as a treatment. Story 29. Not me, but my dad. Bought into a $500K life insurance policy at 42 years old. Many people made fun of him, called him crazy, etc., and he said exactly that, just to be safe. He had a seizure at 43 years old, July 2007. Brain cancer. Died June 2008 at 44. Policy was paid for in less than 2 years. I've carried life insurance since I was 21. Too much cancer in my family, and my dad died extremely young.